Commander Zex Theta floated in the observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship, his four tentacles gripping the railings as he watched the tactical display. The Void Swarm had broken through the outer defenses of the Kepler system, and every species in the Alliance was retreating. Every species except one. The humans hadn't received the retreat order. Or maybe they had and simply ignored it. Zex Theta had served alongside many species in his 300 cycles of life, but humans remained a mystery. They were new to the galactic stage, barely 50 years since first contact, yet they insisted on taking point in every engagement. "Commander, the human fleet is moving forward." His aide chirped through her beak-like mouth. She was a Viathi, a bird-like species known for their keen eyesight and tactical analysis. They're accelerating toward the swarm. Zex Theta's chromatophores shifted to a deep purple, indicating his disbelief. The Void Swarm was not an enemy you charged. They were a plague of biomechanical horrors that had consumed 17 star systems. They adapted to every weapon, learned from every tactic, and grew stronger with each victory. The accepted strategy was containment and slow retreat while evacuating civilians. "Open a channel to Admiral Chun," Zex Theta commanded. The human appeared on screen moments later, her scarred face set in grim determination. Behind her, the bridge of the human dreadnought Indomitable buzzed with activity. "Admiral, the Council has ordered a general retreat. Your fleet is moving in the wrong direction." Chen's lips pulled back in what Zex Theta had learned was called a smile, though it looked more predatory than friendly. "We heard the order, Commander. We're buying time for the evacuation ships." "Admiral, this is suicide. The swarm will adapt to your weapons within minutes. You'll be overwhelmed." "Maybe," Chun said, her fingers dancing over her command console. "But we got a few surprises. Besides, there are 3 billion civilians on Kepler Prime. We don't leave people behind." The channel closed before Zex Theta could respond. He turned back to the tactical display, watching as 47 human vessels formed into a spearhead formation. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. "Sir," his aide's voice trembled. "Should we turn back to assist?" "No," Zex Theta said slowly. "Record everything. If the humans fall here, the galaxy should remember their sacrifice." The first contact came at 1432 Galactic Standard Time. The human fleet opened fire at maximum range, not with the typical plasma cannons or particle beams the galaxy used, but with something else. Projectiles, moving at significant fractions of light speed, tore through the swarm's leading elements. "Kinetic weapons?" the aide squawked. "But those are primitive." Zex Theta said nothing, watching as the human fleet continued its charge. The swarm began to adapt, growing thicker armor plating, but the humans switched tactics immediately. Nuclear explosions bloomed across space, not aimed at the swarm directly, but creating a wall of radiation and electromagnetic interference. "They're disrupting the swarm's communication network," Zex Theta realized. Without their hive mind coordination, the swarm vessels began moving erratically. Then came the ramming. The human destroyer Defiant, its shields failing and hull breached in dozen places, accelerated to maximum thrust and slammed into a swarm mothership. The explosion was visible from 3 light minutes away. Before the debris cleared, 2 more human ships followed suit. "By the 7 suns," his aide whispered. "They're insane." "No," Zex Theta corrected, his tentacles tightening on the railing. "They're human." The battle raged for 6 hours. The humans threw everything at the swarm: antimatter bombs, gravitational mines, even boarding parties in powered armor who jetted across the void to plant charges on swarm vessels. For every human ship destroyed, they took 3 swarm vessels with them. But it wasn't enough. The swarm kept coming, an endless tide of chittering horror. The human fleet was down to 15 ships, all damaged, all running low on ammunition. "Sir, Admiral Chun is broadcasting on all frequencies," the communications officer announced. Chen's image appeared, her uniform torn and blood seeping from a cut on her forehead. Behind her, her bridge sparked with electrical fires. This is Admiral Chun to all Galactic Council forces. We've done what we can. The evacuation fleet has a clear path to the jump point. Get those civilians out of here. Admiral, Zex Theta found himself speaking. Your sacrifice will be remembered. Chun laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills through Zex Theta's membrane. Sacrifice? Who said anything about sacrifice? We're just getting warmed up. She turned to someone off-screen. Lieutenant, execute Protocol Omega. The channel cut off. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, every remaining human ship began broadcasting a strange signal. It wasn't a distress call or a weapon frequency. It was music. Loud, aggressive sounds with pounding rhythms and screaming vocals that the humans called metal. What are they doing? The aide asked. Zex Theta was about to respond when space itself seemed to tear open. Hundreds of new contacts appeared on the tactical display, dropping out of hyperspace dangerously close to the swarm fleet. These weren't military vessels. They were civilian ships, cargo haulers, mining vessels, even pleasure yachts. All human, all armed with improvised weapons. This is Captain Roberts of the merchant vessel Stubborn Mule. A new voice crackled over the comm. We heard you folks were having a party. Mind if we crash it? The civilian fleet opened fire with mining lasers, cargo pod catapults, and industrial cutting beams. It was chaotic, uncoordinated, and absolutely devastating. The swarm, already adapting to military-grade weapons, had no response to repurposed industrial equipment. Zex Theta watched in stunned silence as a luxury yacht rammed a swarm frigate while broadcasting what sounded like ancient Earth opera at maximum volume. A cargo hauler dumped its entire load of processed uranium into a swarm carrier's intake vents. A mining ship used its asteroid-crushing equipment to literally tear swarm vessels apart. Commander, his aide's voice was weak with shock. The Kepler colonists, they came back to fight. Not just colonists, Zex Theta realized as more ships kept arriving. Merchants, travelers, anyone who could get here in time. They heard their military was outnumbered, and they came to help. The tide turned in minutes. The swarm, faced with hundreds of unpredictable opponents using unconventional weapons, began to falter. Their adaptation algorithms couldn't keep up with the sheer variety of attacks. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm began to retreat. But the humans weren't finished. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos, somehow broadcasting from her crippled dreadnought. All ships, pursuit pattern Delta. Don't let a single one escape to report back to their hive. The ragtag fleet gave chase, military and civilian ships working in perfect synchronization despite never having trained together. They hunted down every fleeing swarm vessel with methodical precision. Zex Theta found himself gripping the railing so hard his tentacles ached. He had witnessed something that would change the galaxy's perception of humanity forever. They weren't just another species trying to find their place among the stars. They were something else entirely. When the last swarm vessel was destroyed, the human fleet regrouped. They had lost 60% of their military ships and dozens of civilian vessels, but they had won. More importantly, they had saved 3 billion lives. Sir, his aide spoke quietly. Should we report this to the Council? Zex Theta's chromatophores shifted through a dozen colors before settling on a deep blue of contemplation. Yes, but I doubt they'll believe us. Who would believe that a species would turn a hopeless last stand into a rallying cry for their entire civilization? On the tactical display, the human fleet began limping toward Kepler Prime. Some ships towed others. Military vessels escorted damaged civilian craft. And through it all, that strange music continued to play across the comm channels. Zex Theta had served for 300 cycles. He had seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth and death of stars, and fought in 100 battles. But he had never seen anything like humanity's charge in a battle. They didn't fight for glory or conquest. They fought for each other with a fury that defied all logic and a unity that transcended military hierarchy. As a ship turned to follow the retreat path, Zex Theta made a decision. He would recommend to the Galactic Council that humanity be given a permanent seat on the Military Advisory Board. not because of their technology or their resources, but because they possess something far more dangerous: the ability to turn certain defeat into impossible victory through sheer determination and an absolute refusal to abandon their own. The stars should fear them, Zextheta thought, because humans didn't just fight their enemies. They inspired their entire species to fight alongside them. And that was a power no amount of adaptation could counter. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler, Commander Zextheta found himself in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council. Representatives from 97 species filled the vast chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic vibrations. Today's emergency session had been called to address a crisis that threatened the entire galaxy. The hegemony of Thorns, an ancient empire that had ruled through fear for millennia, had issued an ultimatum: submit to their rule or face extinction. They had already demonstrated their power by reducing 3 systems to cosmic dust with their planet killer weapons. Most species were considering surrender. The humans wished to address the assembly, the speaker announced, her crystalline form chiming with each word. Zextheta watched as General Marcus Thompson took the podium. The human was old by his species' standards, gray-haired with scars that told stories of countless battles. But his eyes burned with the same intensity Zextheta had seen in Admiral Chen's. Distinguished representatives, Thompson began, his voice carrying across the chamber without translation. The hegemony offers you slavery disguised as survival. They promise to spare your worlds if you kneel. But I ask you, what is survival worth if you must watch your children grow up in chains? Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Valari ambassador's feathers ruffled in agitation. Easy words from a species that has only known space for 50 years. The hegemony has weapons that can crack planets like eggs. What can your primitive kinetic weapons do against such power? Thompson smiled, that same predatory expression Zextheta had come to recognize. With respect, Ambassador, you're asking the wrong question. It's not what our weapons can do. It's what we're willing to do with them. He activated a holographic display showing the hegemony's fleet positions. The hegemony has 300 dreadnoughts, each capable of destroying a world. They have million soldiers, technology centuries ahead of most species here, and the confidence of never having lost a war. The assembly grew quiet. These numbers were known, feared, whispered about in the corridors of power. Humanity offers an alternative to surrender, Thompson continued. We call it Operation David Stone. We will lead the charge against the hegemony. Any species willing to stand with us is welcome. Those who wish to remain neutral, we understand. But know this, we will not kneel. The Saurian delegate rose on his powerful legs, scales shifting to display patterns of skepticism. The humans speak of charging into battle as if it were glorious. But we all saw the recordings from Kepler. You lost over half your fleet. You cannot sustain such losses against the hegemony. You're right, Thompson admitted, surprising everyone. We can't sustain those losses. That's why we won't fight the same way. He changed the display, showing human colonies across the galaxy. For the past 3 months, every human world has been preparing. Not just our military, every man, woman, and child who can hold a wrench or pilot a shuttle. We've converted mining ships into missile platforms. We've turned cargo vessels into troop transports. We've even strapped engines and weapons to asteroids. Zextheta felt his chromatophores shift involuntarily. He had submitted reports about human determination, but this was beyond even his expectations. You're talking about turning your entire civilization into a weapon, the speaker observed, her tone neutral but tinged with something that might have been awe. Yes, Thompson said simply, because that's what humans do when faced with extinction. We don't just send our warriors to die. We all stand together. The hegemony expects to fight a military. They'll face a species. The Aviathi representative, one of Zextheta's own aide's relatives, chirped anxiously. But the casualties would be astronomical. You could lose billions. Thompson's expression hardened. Preferable to living on our knees for the next 1,000 years. Besides, we've calculated the odds. If even 10% of the galaxy stand with us, we can win. Not without cost, but we can win. Ow! The question came from the Mechanari delegate, a silicon-based life form known for cold logic. The hegemony's technology is superior in every way. Is it? Thompson asked. They have planet killers, yes. But those weapons are slow, designed to intimidate stationary targets. They have advanced shields, but they've never faced an enemy willing to ram them with 100 ships at once. They have perfect military discipline, but they've never fought an enemy that turns their janitors and accountants into soldiers. He paused, scanning the assembly. And they've never fought humans. The chamber erupted in debate. Some called the humans insane. Others whispered words like inspiring and terrifying. Zex Theta remained silent, remembering the Battle of Kepler, remembering how certain defeat had transformed into impossible victory. After an hour of heated discussion, the speaker called for order. We will vote. Those in favor of accepting the hegemony's terms. 43 species raised their appendages or activated their approval lights. Less than half. Those in favor of resistance. 38 species signaled approval, including several Zex Theta hadn't expected, the peaceful Quellari, the isolationist void dancers, even the ancient preservers. Abstentions. The remaining 16 species, including Zex Theta's own, indicated their neutrality. He wanted to vote for resistance, but his government had ordered him to abstain. Politics and fear still ruled too many worlds. Thompson nodded, seeming satisfied. 38 species willing to fight. That's more than we hoped for. He turned to address those who had voted for surrender. To those choosing submission, we bear you no ill will. Survival is a valid choice. But when the hegemony's chains grow too heavy, when your children ask why they must bow to tyrants, remember that you had a choice. As the assembly began to disperse, Zex Theta found himself approaching the human general. My government ordered me to abstain, he said quietly. But there are those among my people who remember Kepler. If you need volunteers, Thompson clasped one of Zex Theta's tentacles with his hand, a gesture of camaraderie that transcended species. Every voice matters, Commander, even those who must whisper. 6 weeks later, Zex Theta stood on the observation deck of his ship, once again watching a tactical display. But this time, the scale was beyond anything he had imagined. The combined fleet of the Resistance filled space around the hegemony's fortress world of Throne. Over 10,000 ships of every configuration imaginable. True to their word, the humans had brought everything. Military vessels flew alongside converted cruise ships. Asteroid miners had turned their equipment into weapon platforms. There were even several ships that appeared to be welded together amalgamations of spare parts, held together by determination and creative engineering. But most surprising were the volunteers. Humans had come from every corner of the galaxy, but so had others. Valari pilots flew human fighters, their superior reflexes making them deadly in the small craft. Mechanari engineers had integrated themselves into human ship systems, their silicon minds calculating firing solutions faster than any organic. Even some Quellari medics had joined, setting aside their pacifist ways to heal those who fought for freedom. The hegemony's response had been predictable. Their massive fleet, 300 dreadnoughts strong, had formed a perfect defensive sphere around their throne world. They broadcast demands for surrender on all frequencies, promising mercy for those who laid down their arms. The human response was also predictable. They broadcast music, not the aggressive metal from Kepler, but something different. Hundreds of human voices singing together, a battle hymn that spoke of defiance and hope. Soon, other species added their voices, creating a chorus that no translator could fully capture, but everyone understood. Then, Admiral Chen's voice cut through the singing. She had survived Kepler, her ship rebuilt, and her determination undimmed. All ships, this is Fleet Command. Today we show the hegemony that fear is not their monopoly. Today we teach them why tyrants fall. Today we charge in a battle not as separate species, but as free people. Execute Operation David Stone. Good hunting. The charge began unlike any battle in galactic history. Instead of organized formations and careful tactics, the Resistance fleet moved like a force of nature. Fast ships raced ahead, drawing fire and dodging with mad precision. Heavy ships followed, absorbing punishment while delivering their own. Civilian vessels darted between the giants, too small and numerous to target effectively. Zex Theta watched his tactical officer, one of the volunteers who had joined despite their government's neutrality, coordinate with a human squadron. Swarm Pattern 7, she clicked. The big one on the left is cycling shields. The human squadron leader, barely more than a boy, whooped with excitement. Copy that. Tentacle 5. We'll crack it open. You pour in the pain. It should have been chaos. By every military doctrine Zex Theta knew, the uncoordinated charge should have shattered against the hegemony's disciplined defense. But human battle doctrine, he was learning, operated on different principles. Where the hegemony expected organized assault, they faced seemingly random attacks from every direction. Where they prepared for standard weapons, they faced improvised devastation. A human cargo ship dumped its hold of industrial acid into a dreadnought's ventilation system. A pleasure yacht used its entertainment lasers to blind sensor arrays. A mining collective had somehow strapped a small moon with engines and was slowly but inevitably directing it toward the hegemony formation. They're adapting too slowly, Zex Theta Zeta observed. She had insisted on remaining at her post despite the danger. The hegemony has fought wars for millennia, but always against opponents who fought like them. She was right. The hegemony's perfect formations began to crack under the assault of pure, directed chaos. Their commanders, used to enemies who retreated when outgunned, couldn't comprehend opponents who saw overwhelming odds as a challenge rather than a deterrent. Then came the moment that would be remembered in galactic history. The hegemony's flagship, a vessel the size of a small moon, began charging its planet-killer weapon. If it fired, it could destroy a tenth of the Resistance fleet in one shot. All ships, scatter, someone screamed over the comms. Negative. Admiral Chen's voice cut through. All human vessels, converge on my position. Everyone else, clear minimum safe distance. Zex Theta watched in horror and awe as every human ship, military and civilian alike, turned toward the flagship. They accelerated to maximum burn, 1,000 arrows aimed at the heart of tyranny. The hegemony flagship fired its secondary weapons, destroying dozens of human ships. But for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. The humans weren't trying to destroy the flagship. They were going to ram it. By the 7 suns, Zex Theta whispered. They're all going to die. No, his aide said quietly. Look, the human ships weren't just charging blindly. They were hurting the flagship, forcing it to maneuver, to break its firing solution on the planet killer. And behind them, taking advantage of the distraction, the allied alien ships moved into perfect position. The Volari squadrons, flying with precision no human could match, targeted the flagship's weapon systems. Mechanari cyber warfare vessels hacked into its navigation, forcing it to turn away from the fleet. Quelari medical ships, modified with shield generators, created safe corridors for damaged human vessels to retreat. It was beautiful and terrible chaos and coordination in perfect harmony. The humans led the charge, accepting the highest casualties, but they didn't fight alone. Every species brought their strengths to the battle, united by humanity's infectious determination. The flagship's planet killer never fired. A human destroyer, its crew already dead but its engines still burning, slammed into the weapon's focusing array. The explosion chain reacted through the massive ship, tearing it apart from within. With their flagship destroyed and their perfect formations shattered, the hegemony's resolve broke. Ships began to retreat, then surrender. The battle that was supposed to demonstrate the futility of resistance had become proof that tyrants could fall. As the guns fell silent and rescue operations began, Zex Theta received a message from his government. They were reconsidering their neutrality. The The Battle of Throne had shown them something the galaxy needed to understand. Humans didn't just charge into battle with courage. They charged with such conviction that others couldn't help but follow. Standing on his observation deck, watching human and alien ships work together to save survivors for both sides, Zex Theta finally understood why the stars should fear humanity. Not because they were warlike or aggressive, but because they had the power to unite the galaxy's diverse species into something greater. They could turn merchants into warriors, pacifists into healers of soldiers, and neutral observers into quiet supporters. The hegemony had ruled through fear for millennia. In a single day, humanity had shown the galaxy something more powerful: the courage to charge into impossible battles and the ability to inspire others to charge alongside them. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Throne. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The hegemony's fall had created a power vacuum, and from the chaos emerged something new: the Free Systems Alliance, with humanity as one of its founding members. But peace, Zex Theta had learned, brought its own challenges. He stood in the command center of Sanctuary Station, the massive diplomatic hub built from the salvaged remains of hegemony dreadnoughts. As the newly appointed director of interspecies military cooperation, he watched the tactical displays with growing concern. The ancient enemy had returned. The Devourers. They were mentioned only in the oldest records, a race that had nearly consumed the galaxy eons ago, before vanishing into dark space. Now, they were back, and their technology made the hegemony look primitive. They didn't conquer worlds, they dismantled them, atom by atom, converting entire planets into resources for their ever-growing fleet. Director Zex Theta, his human deputy, Colonel Sarah Kim, approached with a grim expression. The Devourer Vanguard has entered the Outer Rim. 7 systems have gone dark. Zex Theta's chromatophores shifted to deep black, a color of dread his species rarely displayed. 7 systems in 3 days. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within a month. The Alliance fleet is mobilizing, Kim reported. But, sir, the numbers, we have 15,000 ships. Long-range scouts report the Devourers have millions. They're not ships in any sense we understand. They're part of a single, vast organism spanning light years. The doors to the command center opened, and General Thompson entered, now bearing the title of Supreme Allied Commander. Age had slowed him, but his eyes still held that familiar fire. Director, Colonel, I assume you've seen the projections. A 20-day campaign ending in total galactic consumption, Zex Theta confirmed. The mathematical models are unanimous. Thompson smiled, that same predatory grin that had unsettled and inspired Zex Theta years ago. Good thing humans don't believe in math. Over the next hours, representatives from every Alliance species arrived. The chamber filled with despair as the scope of the threat became clear. The Devourers weren't invaders. They were a force of nature, a galactic plague that consumed everything in their path. Perhaps we should evacuate to other galaxies, the Quelari ambassador suggested, her melodious voice trembling. Save what we can. With what? The Mechanari collective asked. Intergalactic travel would take generations. The Devourers would follow us anyway. They consume everything. Arguments erupted. Some advocated surrender, hoping to negotiate. Others proposed scattering, making the Devourers work for every world. A few suggested destroying their own planets rather than letting them be consumed. Then, Admiral Chen spoke. She was in a wheelchair now, injuries from countless battles having taken their toll, but her voice commanded instant attention. You're all thinking like prey. Stop it. The chamber fell silent. The Devourers expect us to run or surrender because that's what prey does, she continued. But humans learned something a long time ago, back when we were still hitting each other with rocks. Sometimes the only way to survive is to become scarier than the thing hunting you. Admiral, the Preserver's ancient representative intoned, the Devourers have consumed thousands of galaxies. What could possibly frighten them? Chen's grin was answer enough. Let me tell you about Operation Last Light. The human plan was insanity on a scale that dwarfed even their previous acts of madness. They wouldn't fight the Devourers conventionally. That was impossible. Instead, they would weaponize the one thing the Devourers needed: resources. Every star they consume makes them stronger, Thompson explained, activating a galactic map. So we deny them stars. We turn our suns into weapons. The assembled representatives gasped, clicked, or emitted whatever sounds their species made in shock. "You're talking about destroying your own systems," the Valari ambassador squawked. "Not destroying," Kim corrected. "Weaponizing. We've been working on this since the hegemony fell. Every human colony has been building stellar manipulation devices. We can't stop the Devourers from consuming our stars, but we can make sure they choke on them." The plan was elegant in its apocalyptic simplicity. As the Devourers approached each system, the inhabitants would evacuate. Then they would trigger their stars to go nova, supernova, or in some cases, collapse into black holes. The Devourers would arrive expecting a feast and find only cosmic indigestion. "You'll homeless billions of your own people," someone protested. "Better homeless than consumed," Thompson replied. "And we won't be alone. This only works if everyone participates." The Devourers must find no safe resources anywhere in the galaxy. What followed was the largest evacuation in galactic history. Entire species abandoned their homeworlds, loading onto whatever ships could fly. The humans, true to form, had already begun converting everything: warships into refugee transports, stations into mobile cities, even asteroids into generation ships. Zex Theta found himself coordinating the impossible. 97 species, billions of individuals, all moving in a carefully orchestrated dance of evacuation and destruction. And at the center of it all, humans worked with manic determination, their infectious courage spreading throughout the Alliance. "Why do you do this?" Zex Theta asked Kim one day as they watched another convoy of refugee ships depart. "Your species could have fled to the edges of the galaxy, survived longer than most." Kim shrugged. "Probably. But then we wouldn't be human. We don't abandon our friends, Director. Ever." The Devourers arrived in the first sacrificial system 3 weeks later. Zex Theta watched from a safe distance as the impossible swarm of biomechanical horrors descended on the human colony of New Texas. The colonists had evacuated days ago, leaving only automated systems and a handful of volunteers who had refused to leave. "This is Captain Martinez, commanding the freighter Stubborn as Hell." A voice crackled over the comm. "Devourer fleet, welcome to New Texas. Hope you're hungry." The star exploded. Not a natural stellar death, but a directed detonation that turned the entire system into a cosmic shotgun blast. The Devourer Vanguard, caught completely off guard, was vaporized. But more concerning for the vast organism was the radiation, the gravitational chaos, the sheer indigestibility of what they had tried to consume. The swarm recoiled, its perfect efficiency disrupted for the first time in eons. But they adapted, as everyone knew they would. The next system they approached more cautiously, sending smaller tendrils to test for traps. The colonists of that world, a Valari settlement, triggered their star early. The explosion was smaller but still effective, forcing the Devourers to waste energy shielding themselves. System by system, the galaxy burned. The Alliance fleet harried the Devourers' flanks, not trying to win, but simply to herd them toward the next trap. It was a fighting retreat on a scale never before imagined, entire civilizations sacrificing their homes to buy time. Then came a moment Zex Theta had dreaded. The Devourers reached his own species' homeworld. For a million years, the Cephalori had lived in their deep ocean cities, their culture built on stability and careful thought. Now they had hours to abandon everything. "I'm sorry," Kim said quietly as they watched his people's exodus. "I know what this means to your culture." Zex Theta's tentacles curled in a gesture of acceptance. "We have learned much from humanity, Colonel. Sometimes survival requires sacrifice. Sometimes you must charge into battle even when that battle is against your own nature." His homeworld's 3 suns went nova simultaneously, creating a gravitational maelstrom that trapped a significant portion of the Devourer fleet. The ancient organism screamed across dimensions, a sound that drove some listeners mad. It was working. The careful consumption that had sustained the Devourers for billions of years was becoming a torment. But the price was astronomical. 60% of the galaxy's habitable systems were gone. Trillions of beings drifted in space, homeless and desperate. Food supplies dwindled. Ships broke down. Hope faded. "We can't sustain this much longer," Thompson admitted during an emergency meeting. Half the Alliance leadership was dead, having stayed behind to trigger their home system's destruction. Maybe another week before total social collapse. "Then, we end it," Chin said from her wheelchair. "One final charge. The last stand would be at Galactic Center, around the supermassive black hole that anchored the galaxy. Every remaining ship, every survivor who could hold a weapon or push a button, would make their stand there. The Devourers want resources." Chen's voice echoed across every remaining comm channel. "Let's give them the biggest resource in the galaxy. Let's feed them the black hole itself." It was beyond insanity. It was using gravitic manipulation technology to destabilize the galaxy's own heart, turning it into a weapon that would either destroy the Devourers or everyone. There was no middle ground. As the ragged fleet assembled, Zex Theta marveled at the scene. Ships held together with prayer, and duct tape flew alongside the last functioning dreadnoughts. Species that had been enemies weeks ago shared their final resources. And everywhere, humans moved among them, sharing their strength, their determination, their absolute refusal to go quietly into the night. The Devourers came like a tsunami of hunger, their vast organism stretching across light years. They had adapted to the dying stars, found ways to consume even supernovas. But they had never faced the collective desperation of an entire galaxy. "All ships," Thompson's voice rang out. "This is it. Every species, every soul, every free being in this galaxy. We charge together. We stand together. We fall together if we must. But we will not be consumed quietly." The charge began, not the organized chaos of previous battles, but a unified spear of determination aimed at the heart of darkness. Ships rammed Devourer tendrils, buying seconds for others to advance. The void lit up with weapons fire, exploding reactors, and the death songs of 100 species. Zex Theta found himself at the controls of his ship, his tentacles flying across interfaces as he coordinated with human squadrons. Around him, his remaining crew, Cephalori, humans, Valari, even a few Mechanari, worked as one. "Gravitational resonance building," someone reported. "Black hole destabilization in T-minus 10 minutes. 10 minutes. They had to survive 10 more minutes." The Devourers, sensing the threat, converged on the fleet with renewed fury. Ships died by the hundreds. The human dreadnought Indomitable, Admiral Chen's flagship, took a direct hit that sheared off half its hull. "Admiral, abandon ship," Thompson ordered. Chen's laugh crackled over the dying comms. "Negative, General. Someone needs to manual guide this resonance. Besides, I always wanted to see what the inside of a black hole looked like." Her ship, trailing debris and fire, dove directly into the Devourer mass surrounding the black hole. The explosion as her reactor went critical cleared a path, and into that path poured the desperate remains of the free galaxy. 5 minutes. 4. 3. The black hole began to pulse, its accretion disk fluctuating wildly. The Devourers, for the first time in their eternal existence, showed fear. They tried to retreat, to escape the trap, but it was too late. The gravitational forces were building beyond control. "All ships, maximum distance," Thompson ordered. Now, the survivors fled as space itself began to twist. The black hole, destabilized by the gravitational resonance, began to collapse in ways physics couldn't properly describe. And the Devourers stretched across light years and, deeply entangled with local space-time, were caught in the effect. Zex Theta watched from the edge of the effect as the impossible happened. The Devourers, the eternal consumers, were being consumed, pulled into a gravitational anomaly that twisted their vast organism into configurations that couldn't sustain life. They fought, adapted, tried every survival mechanism evolved over billions of years. But they couldn't adapt to the concentrated desperation of beings who had sacrificed everything. They couldn't consume the determination of species that had burned their own homes to deny resources. They couldn't digest the courage of humans who had taught an entire galaxy that charging in a battle sometimes meant charging in a certain death. The death scream of the Devourers lasted for hours, echoing across dimensions. When it finally faded, so had they. The ancient threat was gone, pulled into a black hole that had itself transformed into something new, a gravitational scar that would mark this victory forever. In the aftermath, as the survivors gathered on makeshift stations and shared their last resources, Zex Theta found himself recording the final log entry for this chapter of galactic history. "I have witnessed humanity charge into battle 3 times, he spoke into the recorder. At Kepler, they showed us courage. At Throne, they showed us unity. At Galactic Center, they showed us sacrifice. But, most importantly, they showed us why the stars fear them." He paused, watching through a viewport as human and alien crews worked together to build new homes from the wreckage of the old. The stars fear humanity not because they are warriors, but because they are teachers. They teach ordinary beings to become extraordinary. They teach merchants to fight and fighters to sacrifice. They teach that victory isn't about superior numbers or technology, but about the willingness to charge into any battle, no matter how hopeless, if it means protecting what matters. The Devourers consumed galaxies. The hegemony ruled through fear. The Void Swarm adapted to everything. But none of them could adapt to a species that turns extinction into motivation, disaster into opportunity, and certain death into just another challenge to overcome. The galaxy will rebuild. We have lost our homes, but we have gained something greater. The knowledge that when we stand together, when we charge together, nothing in the universe can stop us. This is humanity's gift to the stars. This is why they fear them. And this is why we follow them into battle. Zex Theta ended the recording and turned to help with the reconstruction. The galaxy had burned, billions had died, and every species faced a hard road ahead. But they faced it together, infected by humanity's greatest weapon, hope. In the distance, construction ships were already at work, building new colonies from the ashes of the old. And at the forefront, as always, were the humans, not leading through authority, but through example. They had taught the galaxy to charge into battle. Now, they would teach it to charge into the future.